ye ju dan so je cha nam la chan ju pa do da ne ja so je da ke chin so je be so nam je lo la pen je san ru ba ra do san ye ju dan so je cha nam la chan ju pa do da ne ja so je da ke chin so je be so nam je lo la pen je san je ru ba ra sho san ye ju dan so je cha nam la chan ju pa do da ne ja so Ake shinzo jebe sonam je, dola penchele san, lubara shu. Simchen tamche dewa tan dewe kyu tan, tempura kyu je, simchen tamche tunga tan. Tunga je kyu tan, dawara kyu je, simchen tamche tunga mebe dewa tan, min dawara kyu je. Simchen tamche nire cha tan, ni tan, tanyo la ne kora kyu ru je, simchen tamche dewa tan, dewe kyu tan, tempura kyu je, simchen tamche 동아 제 교단 저와라 주제 심전 담제 동아는 매배 대와 담민 저와라 주제 심전 담제 니단 저베 단용 라네 주로치 심전 담제 대와 담제베 유단 템버라 주제 심전 담제 동아 제 교단 저와라 주제 심전 담제 동에 매배 대와 담민 저와라 주제 심전 담제 니단 저베 단용 라네 주로치 Ge tenchen tawara chung, kaba me ba, je me ba, che ba me ba, ta me ba, unwa me ba, do me ba, ta te te men, tenche men, te ba, ni shi, shi te ba, so be, san je men, tam ba te la, cha tse lu, nyen te ji wa, cho nam kun shi, ni ge, ni shi, tin te kan yin, tan, do la, pen pa, je ba, lam shi, ni ge, ji ten, ton, ton, je ba, kan, han, ta, yan, ta, ten, be, tu, na, lam, pa, kun, ten, na, zo, dir, zon, nyen te, chan, chu, sen, pe, so, Gene yom de la cha de lu, tobe dawa nam je sapchen ja je kong wa kong do sum de yu se kune to la cha da e lu, fa ji be je ju shi me do da ma zhe ra lin shi yin de yen ba de san je shin do me de bo wa ye du kun nam da shin la che bo ra ye ta mang go ro re nam me da la kan di ya ta ya e mi Lama sanje lama che, deje lama ke bebe, kunje che bolu. Lama nam la cha tse lo.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering in the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Independent origination, there is no ceasing, no arising, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no separateness, and no sameness. I prostrate to the consummate Buddha, the supreme among all teachers, the one who taught this peace which is free of elaborations. I prostrate to the sublime mother of Buddhas and of the assembly of hearers and bodhisattvas, who through the knower obeys leads hearers seeking pacification to complete peace, who through the knower of paths causes those benefiting migrators to achieve the aims of the world, and who through possession of the exalted knower, the subduer, set forth the varieties having all aspects. the one who has eliminated the web of conceptualizations and is endowed with the divine bodies of the vast and profound, who eternally shines forth the forever noble light rays. To you, the Buddha, I make prostrations. This ground, spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Yedam Guru Ramam Dhamma Pamiyata.
야, 다 참말라. 인공들 레스 쉬어야지. 네, 다 가성어도 아, 로율란 주주지가 다 율율전 미수전에 다 율전 로율라 율전 셰바지 다 율란 주주지 다 지게 남자 셰베 지게 모두 고단 사람이 놓대 모두 된 도르듯이다 두마 저세 yap진 바테레스 다 드린 가서 넣어야 돼. 다 된대기 다 셰바 율란 다 죽술라 라 따지 죽다민다 다 망보지 예배나니 다들 루리든도 예와서 드린 사회 조지도 어디 차대어레스 다 루리든도 예와서 셰바 율전 셰바지다 라랑이 저 율칸이 받들라 주인도라 주술 미다고니다 이틀도 시고 어레스 지난 다 셰바 율라 주들라 루리든도 예와 대지부기 세고 말에 다지 어 가로다 도지 도면 도바단 도면 게 지다 시백이 이틀씩 두스 맞지자고 하래. 다가는 무슨다 제박이 개발고 내자고 하래. 다 다가는 게 왕원다 왕은 영어 말이다. 가는 거.
니들이 하고 생각나서.
아,
니들이 하고 싶어요.
야.
So good afternoon, all. And during our first class, we went through the nature of the mind, sort of general, introduction to the mind, or when we differentiate, the subjective mind and the object that mind comprehends or apprehends. So big two kind of division, and within that we're talking about the subjective mind. And in this class today we'll be talking about what is called in your book the categorizing the ways of categorizing cognition, or the divisions or types of the mind in terms of how mind engages its object of apprehension or comprehension. And what will be discussed today is the 7 division, which in your book is on page 47. So the 7 divisions are primarily divided according to how mind engages its object. And generally, when we talk about subjective mind engaging in its object, there are many different ways of engaging or interacting with objects, its object, such as, on page 47, you see a 7-fold divisions, and then you see 3-fold divisions, as well as 2-fold divisions. And within that, twofold further, you can see sense consciousness versus mental, conceptual versus non-conceptual, and valid versus non versus engaging via exclusion versus engage via affirmation, mind and mental factors, so on and forth. So there are various ways of engaging mind, with its object of apprehension.
임바선자 다 된대기 다 로리든도 로리든도 이 예당대 간디서 연구를 단다 정원을 찾아드리는 데서 개발 지송전에 다 간사지기 이지라 다 짐주도 마선에 제바이나 율강이로 왔지라 된대기 율들라 담보 율데 코기 뭐 가르샤 아니 텔라 제바제인도라 가르서버다 배나 юм전지 거니로 юм전지 거네 마 제바제인도라 배나 당아족이 친일이 비중나라 디그 юм전디 그거래서 배나 돌랭이 라라 체제 매여도 도와여베 체르스니 리바디 그거래서 юм전데 다 돌랭이 라라지디 도안 다시 충분 용사기다 리파존에 다리지 파존에 다른 분이 양다른 분이 도와신 분이 동거에나 미질라 파기라 메요르다 메요살다 민두가 가레세나 도와 용기도 와서 도와 여비 금쟁이 파조들라 메요 받으지만 누구 어레스 간사들라 되게 간디스 누구 어레스도나 다 파조 메 리파조나 다 메요메 하모그니 간사 되게 간사들라 다 간사 젠지기 다 메요비 금쟁라 도와 따서 거니 도와 금쟁도 거니 루비 운동하라 된디기 라데라 메인 두아 메요디 두아 용기 두아즈 김전 거기도 다들 메요나 메나 이나 메나 좀 당복을 대som 지키고 그래서 근데 대som데 마 이게 대som들라 걸로데 곰 곰디지기지 곰 곰바이나 다 메요나 메나다 팔절 여살이 지전에 팔절 여살고 두아 용기 두아서 김전들 두아 김전 라테니고 두아 팔절 여살에 삼삼다 비지 희용 거래서 근데 로데 희용들 다들 이제즈니다 지 단다 공단에 묻힌 임바여 공단에 묻히게 든디 소요래 이제 돌론데 바니 이제 전제 이제 말에 군진 자야지 봐 군진 자야지 배 로리기 디지요래 로리기 대중지 총동지요래 되게 나라 이제 돌론데 바니 이제 전제 돌라 공선에 다 이제 제 로데 가래잖아 율 또벨로라 자고 또벨로다 마도벨로 니스요 당게 이들지게 나라 율 또벨로다 마도벨로 니스요 자고라 어떤데 자기 옆에나니다 그또벨로다 마도벨로 강기 공수 자결해서 여치운들라 그또벨로 공수 자고래서 이 율도벨로 공수 자나 그 율도 두고래 타지도 두고 그래서 타지도 두고 말이다 팔자 또 비춰라 파 타니보다 마서나 랩사비 김전도 전에 다 팔자 그 김전 될라 되네다 파지 파전에 멘도 냠베 로직이 흔들었다 된되게 로들었다 이제도 스마샤기 오레스
Um, so in this book, in terms of how these seven cognition or a seven mind arises in terms of one person aiming at one particular object or analyzing at one particular object. We see that kind of structure or explanation. And if you use another example, first of all, on page 47, you have those sevenfold typology on page 47. So direct perception, inference, subsequent cognition, correct assumption, indeterminate perception, doubt, and then number 7, distorted cognition. So in Buddhist epistemology, kind of or dialectic language, usually the most common metaphor example used was this syllogism kind of statement. The subject is Smoky Mountain, and there is a fire on the smoking mountain because there's a smoke. So smoke is used as a reason to prove, from the fire on that mountain. So so from this statement, what we are seeing is that you can see a two-person, looking from the distance, and from the distance you are seeing a mountain with the blowing smoke, and then the other person doesn't know whether there's a fire there or not. So the first person kind of was telling, the second person that there is a fire on that mountain because there's a smoke. So he is using smoke as a proof, as evidence that there is a fire on that mountain, and that person that he is trying to prove that there is a fire on the mountain. At that moment, that person is in the state of, we can say, doubt, the one of these 7, doubt or, suspicion. So he is in the state of doubt whether is there really, fire on that mountain or not. And so that's just, the state of doubt. And then the first person was kind of sort of convincing him that there is a fire because there's a smoke. So when he hear this kind of statement that there is a fire because there's a smoke, Now, his kind of level of awareness or cognition moved from suspicion into what's in here called correct assumption. The correct assumption. Correct assumption. Now, he kind of assumes that now there must be fire because of the reasoning, the smoke. And in the short text by Quinken, short text on uh, awareness and knowledge, short text, Kunkin Javan Shiva mentioned that correct assumption must be, should be, a mind or awareness cognizing its object. Because when we kind of describe, say, mind into twofold. One thing, what we see is uh, the mind that cognizes and mind that doesn't cognize it. So he said that it should be considered as a mind that cognizes its object or apprehended its object. But however, it is not considered as a 100% or certain. There's a certainty there. It is more kind of tending towards apprehended or cognizing, and because that mind, the correct assumption sort of lean towards sort of knowledge, cognition that there is a fire, So that's why this, is considered as a mind that cognizes or apprehended its object. Correct assumption.
원래 당연히 도도마 총자를 쳤도. 근데 정어는 이제 차대기인데 제 당den데 지송제베는 전부 로시 용도.
저 용마세 안 가르송.
인도알라다고 나 디리샤다. 다 율전 셰바지 율텔라 율카야로 와질라 민니다 율전 셰바디 히위림바 셰인도라 다 당게 김산 당게 공도가바 나진레샤 김산 공도가바 나진 제베이네 제네 히림 기wan도 제네 당가자윈도라 다 당보 로셰데 용도 로셰 당가자와데 카레자바이나 다 당게 멘두와 리파존의 멘두와 메비 김산 카레자나 도와 여러와스 도와 용기도 와스 도와 용한테 아주 미기 통과를 메여바데 통과 말에 리파조 잡로로 리파조 잡라지들 메여바데 통과 말이데 다 도와 여바 용기 여바데 그 남라 푸른 촬영들라 도와데다 김전데 통과로 명가 좀 미기 원본 무슨 통도거라 다 된데기 김전라 때네 다 미기 마타에 뭐보지 여바다 히빌로 된데기 로지 히발라 다 담보 여나 매나 냠베게다 디지오라 다디 파존에 메요 마레 냐베 그 파조 가자들라 리 파존 라파야나 미 리오 메요 마레 냐베게 로지키게레스 텐데기 로텔라다 로셰즈니 로셰디 차데샤스 다 로셰 담보 키디올라다 가 율지라 미니 케바이나 다 루리든 보데 율지라 미니 다 케원도 제바이나 담보 로셰 키게레스 다 로셰 키다 가레스나 다 로바데게 다 리 파존에 메 요레즈나 파조 람상 이치금을 가요리 리파전은 아주 매여 말을 하게 돼서 어떤데게 다매 타주도 매매냐 봐도 그 로시 차대요 그래서 다 대기 김전한테는 매여래 매여 이까지는 그 도와 용도 와 파전에 도와 용거 통이도 와서 김전 거 되는 다 된데게 김전들 때는 다 오다 양콜라 당기 매 타주도 매냐 베게 로데 망 콩온도 넘어서는 모든 줄니 다 김전들 때는다 오 메여는 매나 선배양 람산디 여나 매나 냠베게 로지키인 걸 때라다 대솜차고 그래서 또 로시 대솜 그러와 다 대지도 다 매통이도 와서 도와 통이도 와서 도에 김전라 땡도라다 로시네 대솜네다 다 팔제 매여사래 냠바서 기용도라다 이저데 용거래서 되네 로시 대솜 이저 되네가 가려용도 제바 제바키도 다 제바키도 제바 가르즈나 다 된데게 도에게 따라테네 테네 다 리포전에 메여 방에베게 로지 토마 키용도라 다 된데게 로달라 다 제바지고 그래서 ko jeba ize gyumzen karezana dende ge lode ta tambo chema jagores thoma hi ta metaji ndu nyambege lodere metaji ndu nyambe lodere te dende lode chema jagores chema jago gyumzen karezana ko dewe gyumzen la dene taji do me yeba ngebege loji 차대요레스 데네게 로차 차자 데라고 제바든 달라든 케베게 세마지 윤전도 전에 세마임베 윤전도 전에 다고라 제바즈니 자고레스 다 코까지 담보데 세마레니 까지 니바드네 마 까지 지게 윤전도만 코 세메게 몰라 내야게 윤전도 가져 자고르든 다 까지 지 데네게 다 세골지 도베 윤전지 데네게 네 내제지 모두 니고 말에 세명올라 람상 고바 까지니바 마 표두등라 고 제신교 두바레스 다 제바 지수 제신고라 다 덴데게 다 제바 로데라 다마 고 곰기 고마 곰디제마 도바이나 칼레칼레 림베게 고 무슨징어 덴데게 도베게 로데 무슨징어 마 표도지요레스 고데 무슨징어 표도도라 다 무슨데 자고레스 dun changso
나나마이마 두 장스 나나마이마 장소
알레 나르마 버체송 양데 버라
나나마이마 타마들 샤시
모순지로 오타 나라망가 바스디 치다 나라망가 바스디 율 페나 율 카야 로아지 낭낭데겐 엠 타지도 템바템보 메데겐지 페나 가족에 가르조르다 가르사보 덴디지 사위네 갑라 임바이나 미기주 사와테다 나위긴다 지단 제라 소바데니 니인도라 코 왕부 니숨지기 자와데 냠도 지은 거스 왕부 니숨지기 자와 냠도 지은도라 강라서 다 지기 젠로 대사 슈체요나 대사데 니거마도 왕부 젬바데 저게 다가지 니투고 말레스 대기 임생 유고 나라망가 바스 낭양 망해 바즈네 율데 낭고레 율데 낭요레 아니 녜요 말레스 어디기 전에 나라망가 바스 자고레 단 도도 너버체나 로리 둔제 제들라 율지라 아니 코케위 림베게 완도체네 아니 로리 둔제 도스마 자바치레샤스 자고레스
베베 고나는데 메데 메레 베샤네 고 림바 계단 방든 직송 인신알데 와바데 샤시 비윈을 녜 도섬스
다당에 멜레게네 자바이나 당에 디로 다 팔제 다 리파존에 메여사레 냠바타고데 이조 차송아 다 덴데게 이조데 다 도와 메여데 도와여웨 저 도에 달라더니 메 토망에 로데 제바 차데로 데게지니바데 제 다가는 제시 차데요레스 그래도 되네 다 가지니 바로 다 고토바인데 도비 모데 다 곰디 되네게 에 도바랑이 몰라 다 곰바 지기지 곰니도에나 다 타마고 무슨 경우로 표두고 그래서 다 도비 율도비로 간다 도바지 임바이나 간다 가이 임바이나 무슨 경우로 마표바 컨트로사요 말레스 한이 살런도사요 말레스 임바이 김전데 전에다 배나 찾아배나 다 당부 리파조 라비알만도 통고 말아 다고 공바기안에 파죠 도바이나 남지 메인 둘레 레바이나 맹모숨도 미기 엄방모숨비 통용 거라 미기 엄방모숨도 통이지 나 미기 마통와라 두에 달라더니 보샤베기 메디 소소 엄방모숨이 거로 나용들라 공모숨이 거로 표도 왔어 지바 데네도 보시면도
So in this class we are covering page 47 and 8. Page 47 and 8 is basically sort of outline, the list of categorizing cognition. And for sevenfold then classifications or type, it is on page 247, unmarked page 247 until 277. So 7 typology of cognition. so in the book, the seven types were listed, beginning with the distorted cognition, doubt, second, third, correct assumption, um, and then fourth, inferential cognition, fifth, subsequent cognition, and then six, direct perception, and seven, indeterminate perception. And then how it engages in particular object. For example, on fire, it is mentioned on page 276. In terms of engaging in one particular object by one particular person or consciousness, say, again, regarding the fire on the mountain, first, uh, having a thought that because of not, knowing any reason that there must not be a fire on that mountain. And at that stage, the state of awareness or cognition would be distorted, mistaken, referring to that, that mountain with the blowing smoke with fire. And then, as we said earlier, somebody came and said, there should be fire on that mountain because there's a smoke. At that time, the person who is having first kind of state in the distortion now moved into kind of the awareness of, a doubt, uh, uh, um, doubt and um, uh, so when we at the stage of distortion, distorted, uh, eventually, that person is trying to understand whether there is a fire on that mountain or not. And the fire by itself is not directly perceivable by, sense organ. So if he must rely upon, the fire on the smoke as a reason. And therefore kind of maybe not believing, not trusting in the reason, that kind of distorted or mistaken. And then um, uh, you know, because of somebody kind of, as I said earlier, using a reasoning of smoke, there is a smoke, so there must be a fire. He moved from a distortion to the stage of, uh, um, distortion to the stage of doubt, and his doubt kind of arises from knowing the knowledge of because of the smoke as a reason. And here we are seeing kind of transition of the same consciousness from distortion, mistaken, to the another kind of stage of, stage which is suspicion or doubt, or aiming at the same object. And now, because at that stage, now he's at the, stage of doubt, and using the same reason, because of the smoke, there is a, fire. Probably there should be fire. And at that stage, he moved from, the doubt to correct assumption. Now he's assuming that, there should be fire, again, using the same reason. And after correct assumption, as soon as so and here what's happening is that he got to that correct assumption using the reasoning. The reasoning here is the smoke. So by relying on the smoke as a reason, and now he generated or produced what is at this stage called a valid cognition. Now the cognition that he has is a valid because he based his understanding or awareness on a kind of definite reason, and at the first moment that he got this, cognition or understanding that, yes, this is fire because certainty, a conviction, and that is, so at that stage is, inferential cognition. So third, and as soon as the inference kind of produce the next moment, because inference itself, in terms of period, it's just a momentary, just a snap time. As soon as he kind of realized that, yes, fire because of smoke, using a smoke as an inference reason, the second moment becomes what is called subsequent cognition, and subsequent cognition from the seven, subsequent cognition. And the subsequent cognition, you know, as a person, becomes more familiar with the subsequent cognition, eventually it must become what's called correct, because what's called direct perception. So direct perception, it must eventually must turn into direct perception, because when applying this to the practice of realizations of the path, once you start from not knowing, moving from doubt, then to inference, subsequent cognition, eventually it must come to direct perception. Otherwise, that's kind of the ultimate option, and has to move towards that direction. And so in the case of the same kind of scenario mentioned on page 276, again, the direct perception is eventually, say, the person looking at the mountain from the distance, and then, as we said earlier, went through the process of first distortion, then, doubt, then inferential, and then correct assumption, and then finally, say, he move, walk towards the mountain and reach next to the fire. Now he is seeing fire directly by his, eye, and that is the kind of direct perception. And so that's the kind of, the how this sevenfold typology kind of applies to one scenario where, as we said earlier, a person looking at the distant mountain with the smoke and proving that there is a fire.
다 당기기 다 맹모숨도 통 어머고숨도 통이 된디기 통에 내가면 야 초전바지네 다 나위긴다 다슈 첨보지도스마
나망에 되지.
통이 토용도용라 다 대나라만가 차디 다 메통바이나 메난고 어때 나와든 파존 다데 슈체 송경기 다데 고야마돈 미기 메통야들라 다가지 네바텐 네투고 말에 데 된디기 로텔라타 나라만가 바스 티자고 그래서
And we left the final one, indeterminate perception. Indeterminate perception usually is when there is an engaging of two object of apprehension by two consciousness at the same time. Say you are listening to the music while watching performance. At that time, the two consciousness or organs are simultaneously engaging at the same time. Yet, whichever is more kind of convincing, or whichever is more focused at that time, that would be the result. That will kind of you will have that recollection later. And so, in this case, again, we are using the mountain, fire, and say looking at the fire, but at that time, you are hearing very loud sound, and you got distracted by the loud sound. So the fire becomes sort of indeterminate perception. You saw kind of fire, things, but then there's a certain strong distraction that kind of takes away your attention or awareness, and the fire becomes the consciousness that perceives the fire becomes indeterminate perception.
다 된디기 다 로리 든 유라 주술라다 넘버 미다에 오네 든두 자바레 테 자베나네 다 토마 로시 방부 로시 데 셰고 김장 카레즈바이나 단다 경험을 차뎀디나라 카레즈바나 시바 율라 주 주윤도라 된디기 주빌로들라 양다바지다 양다바 마임비기다 로니 용거레스 다 된디기 양다바다 양다바 마임바 로니 용도라 요도라 양다바 마임비기 로데기데 가레자나 민도바 동알리 유 대다 대키에버 동알 대다 대 카르와지 키에버 제하다 오다 동알 치야기다 유단켄 지교래 되게 된 거야 제도 다 로시데 담보 된 거데 다 로친지 로 강이 바데 원랑 거 바이나 로 양다 바데 히와데 템포 용거레스
Mm.
다 노르드나 가족에 대완도 바다 동안 면대 바지 거라 동안 대완도 바다 동안 면대 바 임바이나 담보 동안 키야기 대화진 되발라 대화 두부요나 동안 키야기 유데마 아니 동안 키야메 마조바이나 대화 두토야요 말에 되게 김전도 전에 다 로시데 담버 템바 데레스
So in this context, the seven type of cognition begins with the distorted or mistaken, cognition. And the reason I mentioned in this book was that generally when we talk about mind engaging in its object, we categorize broadly into a valid or non-valid, or mistaken or non-mistaken. And here, it starts from non-valid or mistaken. So, it comes down to dealing with the origin or sources of our own kind of suffering, and because distorted cognition or mistaken cognition or invalid cognition, this becomes the causes of the suffering that we so don't want to kind of experience, and therefore, in order to kind of seize or stop deliberately those sources of the suffering, we need to understand how they arises, and and so, when you're able to do that sort of cease, stop arising or production of the distorted cognition, it allows, on the other hand, valid, positive, constructive, virtuous mind kind of generate, kind of more, more kind of stable way and more kind of efficient. And that's why, it starts with kind of, the negative or invalid cognition.
다 된데게 로시데 간디라부지라 자고래 자베나 페나 지다베게 다 치를 베투다메와 지다바제 지로 지다베게 다타번 징거레스 다 제어데 아주 다데 코 타바다 ngobu니기나네 타바다 미타비니네 타바다 미타비니네 타바레마도 다 미타바즈 마레 다 남게 연도레스 코 남게 케주레스 임바 손장 다타바 레진지 거 텐데 지다비 유라 유베게 탄 다타반 진 진바서 부지어로 어 텐데 긴 진바티 terla losses ni chago res ta daga nejingi ta ribon rendin toba ribon gola rayo ban zin bin zibal tabu ta daga nejingi ta le yunde mebar zin bin zibal tabu kiwa ngaji mebar zin bin zibal tabu o tezo ganga duzma loshi chade yo res ta ro
So distorted cognition. What are what is distorted cognition? For example, particularist, which is one of the ancient non-Buddhist school, considered sound as a permanent entity. Unlike in Buddhism, we consider sound as impermanent. So they consider or believe, the sound as impermanent entity, and it is considered as a quality of the space of the sky, and that kind of apprehension that sound is permanent is considered as a distorted cognition. Likewise, apprehension of rapid horn, distorted, and likewise, apprehending or believing that there is no cause and effect is distorted, and likewise there is no rebirth, non-existence of rebirth. Such apprehension or cognition is considered as a distortion or distorted.
다 덴데게 제다 발라다 다 다반 징거래 다 콜은 다 미다반 두비운도 두다 가래잖아 어 코랑긴 다 남게 연도래 지고 다 남게 연도래 대김생 다 다바래 다 오늘 다 유견을 해버려 말해 제가 저기들라 다 남비 자가기 줍다면 뭐되게 대속에 다 유견을 해버려 다 해버려 유견을 해버려 유견을 해버려 돼 미타바 말해 했으니 대자고 다 임바 인자 다 미타바 레와 다 미타바 임견자가 다 유견을 해도 와스 다 유견을 해봐 가인 받라 미타바스니 자고 그래서 그래서나 제바다 미타바 ज्यादा ने हेबा ज्यादा तो कंगा ने कलो तंग से तंजी मिंगी नामदा से गोरा ने तंदा चिला को मिंगी नामदा मिंडा रे मा तो चाबी के मोची रे जिन ओदु सिनेता दाचे मिता दे जेबा इम्बे चरजने ते दुबो युमजन जेबे तालातने हेबे तालातने ता हेबे ताने हेबा जना दुरा हेबे तालातने दाचे मिता दे हेबा इम्बे चरज हेबे तालातने नदा मिता बदुसमा दुबो रेस
So when non-Buddhist school, like a particularists, assert that sound is permanent, and that sound is the sort of features or attribute of the space, uh, obviously in Buddhism the assertion is opposite. So Buddhists would ask kind of this pose this question: does sound depends upon causes and factors? And that non-Buddhists would say they would respond, yes, it depends on cause and factors, but they also claim at the same time that sound is permanent. Now the Buddhists then kind of moves on to kind of to prove the impermanence of sound by saying that Buddhists, again, this syllogism that sound is the subject, it must be impermanent. And then they use the reason as one that we said earlier, because it is dependent on cause and factors, because it is functioning thing, because it is a production. So, when we use in Buddhist context, cause and effect, dependent on cause and effect, functioning thing, production, these are all synonymous. This all means same, and whatever entity that has these qualities, by logic in Buddhist sense, must be impermanence, cannot be a permanent entity.
다 덴데 제다 발도 되게 다 코랑 율라다 다 타주도 다 따바래 냠베 덴데게 다 짐바슈 좀 요로 다 덴데게 짐바슈 좀 요데도라 데 요데베 내가는 아니 나비 투다메와 되게 다미 다미다바래 미다바 임베 가르스는 고 유전리 유견리 해바로 유견리 해바리도 하세 윤전데 고도라 다 콜라 에 칼로다 덴데게 융라다 다미다바이 이민 이 체맥이 중라고 로종 제용되라 다 윤제 망보지 두스만다 미다바임비 윤제 망보지 통용되라 오다 말 코랑기 다 타지도 따바레 냠베게 로도지어라 근데 로도데 이고 니바다 마서네 고슈 추르 마차니 오다 간디나 따바이나 메나 탄다 타지도 다 따바레잖아 디기 미도 고 윤제 망보지를 때는 가르스네 유견을 유단견을 개발라 소바 다 가지기지긴 지바요 지규여대 발라 소베게 된데게 있다 윤제 망보 통용도라 다 타지도 따바이나 메나냐 벌써 시에도라 제다바 코랑 줄라 다데 된데게 다 나르긴 다 따반 짐빈 짐바데 태솜빙 어페니 다 태솜제야데 율 가에로와질라 아니 타니스 여와 마체베게 로진 니바진질라 다 태솜제 자고레스
Uh, so using the same kind of scenario here, that particularist and non-Buddhist, because of their assertion that sound is permanent, and they believe in such statement, it is to them, it is because of their familiarity, and because of such power of familiarity, they believe in such statement. The sound is permanent. And now, kind of encountering with the Buddhism here, Buddhists kind of claiming that sound is impermanent because, it depends on causes and conditions, um, and many other kind of reasonings, logic in from epistemology. And when he kind of contemplate more about his own statement, that that's this sound is, instead of permanent, it is, the Buddhists are saying, impermanent. When he contemplate and when he thinks more about the reasoning, the power or intensity of his kind of grasping into such a strong sort of belief becomes sort of loosened, and now he kind of that power becomes less powerful, less strengthened, and he falls into sort of into what I claimed earlier, is that really a fact or not? Because thinking about, using, because sound by nature is, momentary, kind of depends on cause and factors, production, and sort of he falls into the state of, what we call two-pointed cognition, which is doubt. So, and so that particularist person now kind of, we can say, move into the state of cognition of doubt, which doubt definition. I'm reading from the text 267. Um, uh, Cognition that on its own vacillates between two points with uncertainty about the object. So a kind of, two-pointed mind and not sure which kind of which where to go. So that's the state of doubt.
어때 된대게 다 율라다 타지도 네바 마체베 로지 니바 징기 로텔라 다테 좀전에 자고레다 다 제다발테 볼레 춤바이나 제다베게 엔다타반 제민 지바 다 타지도 타반 제민 지바테 레마 다 타바이나 미타바 타바세고는 다 미타바이나 그때 미타바 임베 초라 윤전 망안도 다 타바레제 타바 임베 초라 윤전 셰드 당다민도 타바 임베 윤전 민도 좀 고리베기 제바지인도라 고리 너바통네 코랑이 다타반즈민 짐베 리바지어라 데리 리바텔라타고 너바통네 다 팔잘 미타바 인사레 냠베 다 미타베 초라마 슈첸도텔라 당에 이주여야 되다 띵고레스
So the doubt, as said here, vacillates between two standpoints with uncertainty about the object. So kind of two-pointed mind. And in this case, a particular non-Buddhist is at the stage of two-pointed kind of vacillating between, whether it's permanent or impermanent about the sound. And again, using his own logic, his own understanding, it must be probably impermanent because of, the stated reason earlier. So when he came into kind of the stage of most likely it's kind of impermanent, when he's leaning towards that kind of cognition, he moved into a state of correct assumption.
다 가상하면 아주 제샤바데다 민다와지 딜라카 정말 자답디는 카리도즈나 이절은 나시게다 예와 민다 망부지탕무다 이절은 나시 예와 민다 엉안다 지탕도 다때 도전 가상하면 아주 도요 말에 이절 예와 젠도메 삼소로 다때라 가르잖아 콜 김제메 비이저스 직 윤전당 갈비 이저즈니 니 당인도 윤전 망해비 이저즈니 직 당인도 근데 윤전 마두비 이저즈니 당인도 윤전 여기랑 텔라마바비 이저즈니 당인도 라 다되게 계속 그 로가로 얘기를 지잖아 당부 윤전 매비 이저다 보디 가 윤전 가양 매버 본바 제바 인냐베 이저다 보스 배나 다 리바도 윤전 갈라 맞다면 다가세 남이다 버레제 타보데 다가네 진 가랑 저기 예, 다 갈라오다 음 김장 가야마도 다 담이다 버레 제얼타고 다 다가네 진기 가지고 단다 아 근데 추기 고등 가야 마셔발라 다 캡수 체제네 다 공조라 캡수 돼야지 여러 감도다 보대 대사 보양 다 이제서도 차기거든 김장매 비죠 되네 에 마제베 달레 봄바 제바인 마제베 달레 봄바 제바인 냐비 이제서 보스 다 봄바 제바인 임바디 가르잖아 마제 버려와스 다데 윤점에 비인지 랑저던 다 미다버에 민자 가르잖아 딱 버려와스 제도 차대셔 데다 이제 다 덴데게 다 미다버에 다딱 버려 가서다 다 미다버에 민자 가서 딱 버려와스니 조르비지 차대도 윤점에 비이제지 다데
I'm thinking that's right. And so
윤점은 갈비 이제서 윤점은 갈비 이제지 그 고랑기 시야기 윤점 리바데다 아니 두야기 두지니 버데 petgora nangal tata yinde genji lko shabaina de gimzen nangal wi chezene teni sungi duro
unlike the text that we studied earlier about the seven-fold typology of the cognition, in this text about the indeterminate, correct assumption. Correct assumption, it mentioned five kind of, types. It's on page 269. Five types of correct assumption. Correct assumption without reason, correct assumption with the contradictory reason, correct assumption with an inconclusive reason, and correct assumption with an unestablished reason, and correct assumption with a reason that is not properly understood. So, and also, it mentioned the example, first thinking without any reason that the pot is produced. So basically, believing in something without any reason. Again, statements such as sound is permanent, and you don't have any reason why you believe in such statement. But believing or claiming such is the, for example, the first kind of correct assumption without any reason.
sumbade pumba cheba rewas pumba cheba mi gimzen garazne jalcha rewazne jalcha gimzen jalcha gi gimzen le tenne ta pumba cheba imbe nyam pumba cheba re nyambe gir lo tabude ta tejagi do ta te garazne jalcha inna cheba ingo ngeba yomarwa jalcha la garazne cheba da majeba niga ये देव समझा जल्दी गिमजन लेते नहीं चिबा इम्बी चिदान डूब तो गयो हमारे दे ताको गिमजन हम लोग माता जी जल्दी गिमजन जो कोई शबाने ताकरां कोई बात देखी था कल होता ये चीज़ हो रहा ये चीज़ हो रहा बची इन्हें जिबा दरवा जिबा तो करो और मिशी की जुंजे ताले पुंबा चिबा इन ने भी जो तो बस 다 분바 제바로와 제바 임제 가서 분바 미식이 종인도 미식이 통인도 와서 미식이 통 종자 인소나 제바 인구로 와서니 된데게다 이제 더부 가서는 유전 마두비 이제르샤 당 아바데 가르잖아 다 제바다 제나 미다베 차바 망해버 제베다 렌다 미다바 인냐베 이제 더부스 다 다체 미다데 제바 임베 지금 거 용도라 담보 두사 가자들 가리고 거르는 그 딘디기 마고 공라 파조 가자 되게 다 제바 임바 하고 제발라 미다바인 제바이나 미다바 인구레스 제바다 미다베 캬바데 하고 고데인지 다 덴데기 가자질라 다치제 미다데 제바임베 있어서 그 юм전 다다 юм전 양다도 누구 다데 개구지 말타와진 파조되긴 다 제바임바 하고기 도면도 돼야 말타 제발라 미다베 캬바데 하고 요메 대 개구지 말타와진 당분이는 다시 미다데 제바임베 있어서 юм전 거 샤베이나 더부디 덴데기 юм전 라테네다 다제바레 냠베게다 로터부데다 이정아 바데르샤
And the example of the second, of the five correct assumption, the second is the correct assumption with the contradictory reason. And pot is produced, but it is not produced. Basically, as it says, contradictory reason. The reason doesn't apply. It's just a contradiction. Same as saying, sound is permanent because it is impermanent. It's the reason doesn't make sense. You are just using the opposite. And basically, what you are trying to establish and what logic that you are using is totally kind of contradiction. It doesn't really serve. So that's kind of second. And third, a correct assumption with an inconclusive reason. Third is thinking that the pot is produced because it is an object of comprehension. Again, in the logical kind of dialectical language, saying that a pot is functioning or produced thing because it is a comprehensible thing. That's not a proper logic. Whatever is the object of comprehension does not necessarily mean, production or produced. It could be non-produced as well. So it's not, inconclusive. It's a inconclusive reason. And number four, correct assumption with an unestablished reason. Unestablished reason. Sound is produced because it is an object of eye consciousness. Again, saying that sound is the subject. It is impermanent because it is object of eye consciousness. Sound is produced because it is an object of eye consciousness. In debate language, you would say no pervasion. Doesn't mean something that is object of eye consciousness is necessarily produced thing. And then number fifth. Correct assumption with the reason that is not properly understood. So number fifth, the example, thinking that sound is impermanent because it is produced without having first ascertained that the sound is produced. Second, perversion that if something is produced, it must be permanent. So unestablished reason, meaning, when you're using this, say, when you're using to other person, that sound is impermanent because, it is functioning thing. So functioning thing, when you're trying to prove that to other person, the other person must know that, these two things, the sound is produced, and there must be a perversion that if something is produced, it must be impermanent. That other person should have that knowledge. If that person doesn't have that knowledge and you just use this, syllogism, sound is impermanent because it is, functioning, it doesn't make any sense to that person. So that person to whom you are using this logic has to have some prior knowledge of, as said here, by nature, the sound is production. And second, there is a perversion meaning if something is impermanent, it's a functioning thing, or you can say, the reverse way, if something is functioning, it should be impermanent. So that person has that prior knowledge in order to make your kind of statement and syllogism sense. Otherwise, it becomes not properly, understood. The person won't have any understanding of what you are saying. Yes. You will take a break here.
다지다 안에 김전 거야라 김전 마고 뱅아롤도 간사 치러본 간사 8월 볼라 김전지 거기는 김전데 마고 뱅아롤도 가자 8월 벽에 네고 아질라 가래잖아. 따주 된솜전 따 아니 두지추 주지즈네 숨용 거래서. 대숨부터 다 아장장 네바 임바 네고 임바지네. 대 대된도 가르고 거래잖아. 다 그는 다 다쳐제 미다데 제바 이메이지 두스만 니 쳐젠지 아니 디 두지추 기만데 두지추제 아니 타마데 따즈니 юм전데 차고 다 다쳐제 미다데 제바 이메이지 두스마 거발라 때 마고베 나롤도 파조 거사기 가사되게 가래 하고 고고 요래서 봐나 아니 에 디 최전데 니디 임바 하고 고고 요래서 시고 요래서 파조 거사 가사기 다 최저 미다데 제바 이메이지다 다 제바 임바 잠제 학교에 하마고 고메바이나 때 김전데 거니 김전 양다도 누구 말해서 직 니바데 가래잖아 다디 제바이나 미다바임비 캬바데 코니 파조 인간냠 우여레스 제바이나 미다바임 미다바임 제바임비 캬바즈네 에 딘디게 캬바데 인짐지 녜고요레스 데 녜바임바이나 다 딘디게 юм쟁이리 원도 하고데 여바이나 다 바로 볼라 나 미다바레와스 다디 미다바레와스 코 임비 김자 가레잖아 제바린도와스 디 제바린도와 제다 제바린도 제발라 미다비 캬방인도와스 다 녜서나 다 니니디에 코 망해봐데 다 김전 거니 두고요 다 딘디게 김전 가야 마사바지네 바로 김전 거사들라 다다 제바 임바다 제나 미다비 캬바 다디 주지딤 임바다 딸은 누리치기 캬바지 여러 데니 캬바가야 망해발라다 김전 죽고 봐이나 다고 단나디 김전 가야 메비 가자 김전 가야 김전 여겨 텔라마 바비 이제자 다데 나바데 이제 나바데도 마 차두고 그래
Um, whenever we use logical statement or syllogism, that we used earlier in Buddhist dialectic. Sound is the subject, is impermanent because functioning thing. So, of course, when you're using this, syllogism or language statement to your opponents, the opponent must have a minimum understanding of what these three are, right? So, you has to have, in these three object that needs to be established. What you are trying to establish is a functioning thing, impermanent, and then you are using the reason, and then the subject itself is the sound. So has to understand these three components at the minimum. And additional to that, that person, when you're using sound is impermanent because it's a functioning thing, that person must know that sound, the connection between the sound and functioning thing, and that he must know that sound is a functioning thing. So if he doesn't know sound is a functioning thing, using this syllogism, it doesn't make any sense. The first thing. The second thing is, that person must know, right now we're on the fifth one, the correct assumption with a reason that is not properly understood. So secondly, that person must know the connection between what we called, interpretation between a functioning thing and impermanent. Whatever is a functioning thing must be impermanent. What is impermanent must be a functioning thing. So these two are interpervasive. So that person must know these basic things. Without knowing this, if you use this logic to, somebody, it doesn't make any sense. So that's what the fifth one is saying, here. Fifth, the correct assumption, reason that is not properly understood. Somebody that you are trying to use, using your reason, he doesn't understand what, the foundation or the basis, and using, therefore, this kind of syllogism doesn't make any sense.
어다 딘디게 다 될라 됩니다
이 딸이 차상지 가가지고 나 도섬 생각 제 말로
다 제바임바 하고 제발라 메다베 캬바 하고니 다 콜라 김전 거들은 다 미다버와 미다베 김전 제바레즈니 제베 김전 라테니 다 단 담이다 바래 냠베 다 김전 라테니 또 김전데 김전 양다도 통바이나 남지 코 김전데 김전 양다도 통바이나 네 담이다 방니 니고레스 다 콜란 담이다 바도 빌로디 키고르와 텐데기 다 김전 라테니 제비 김전 라테니 다 담이다 바래 냠베기 담이다 방네베기 네시디 네시달라다 지바즈니다 지고레스
So uh, the part that we just mentioned earlier, uh, reasoning and rationality. There's a whole section in this book which we are not going to cover. Part 5. There's a whole section about the reasoning and reality and three modes and so on and forth. We are not covering this part in this kind of course. So somebody who has that kind of knowledge or understanding of the reason, that we said earlier, who has an understanding that sound is who understand sound by nature is a functioning thing, and interpervasiveness between functioning thing and impermanent. And to that person, when you use, this Tibetan dialectic kind of, sound is impermanent, sound is a subject, it is impermanent because it's a functioning thing. Now that makes sense to that person. And with that kind of syllogism or logical statement, to that person, he will then kind of come to some understanding that now sound is impermanent. And when he get to that point that sound is impermanent or must be impermanent because of the prior kind of reasoning, at that moment he now move on to this he kind of he attained or he got inferential cognition. Now, he has his own kind of understanding of the reason why, the sound is impermanent. It's an inference or inferential cognition.
다 텐데 제바데 다 담보 김전 허럴베게 제비 김전 라테니 김네 김전 거밭 계속 텔라다 소속이다 체메기 중라 로정 지야라 소바다 베나타나 가란 쪽이다 담미다베고 담미다바레 미다베 김전 가레 제바레스는 두스마 셰발라 소베게 이 로텔라 튠중 다 퇴바데 코 담미다베 김전 담보 퇴로 퇴바 텔라 데네다 양결 콜라랑 코라랑 다 소송은에다 에이 samlu to ne ta mitaba rinduwa midu mitaba mi gyumsan kar rindu cheba rinduwa cheba mi gyumsan ta tinde ge ta gyumsan mangbo samlu ta bala tenne ta ta da thaji do ta mitaba ngebe ge ta ngeshi de la ta samjung sharab san sanamido ta da mitaba ngebe ge jeba zanan chikbar esko.
Um, so using reasoning such as the one we said earlier, inferential kind of reasoning, sound is impermanent because it is a functioning thing. And you can use many other kind of reasoning from, epistemological kind of subject. And but this knowledge first you attain through what we call the literal word is listening, hearing. You listen to this, and at first stage it's a listening, and you listen and you attain some understanding, and whatever you have listened or heard, then you take that into another level of usually translated as contemplation. You think about it again and again, additional to the reason that you know, and then more kind of reason that or whatever that you have. So you contemplate again and again, and then you reach to the point where you gain sort of complete or absolute conviction that sound is impermanent. When you reach that, then we call that stage, we can say, gain inferential cognition or wisdom derived from contemplation. Wisdom derived from contemplation. So that's the kind of whole another level of getting a conviction of this sound is impermanent.
Tendegi ta jeba hizul de la ta modobji jeba tabe jeba ichi jeba zene ta 기타 게 미다와다 수명 거 뭐도 제바제도라다 다나가란 쪽에다
지나를 또 됩니다. 또 빼시.
뭐 숨기 조율도 결백에 율도 간가 아니 김장 대다달라 때네 김장 거니 고 네빌 제바들라 뭐도 제바제고리 다 대마임베다 타베 제바제데 다 지된 타발라 김장 때네다 기베 제바달라 타베 제바제노 다 대민기 다 레기온데서 다 기왕가 찔러서 버텨서 건가 가르잖아 쉬어라 이치 전에다 상기기 손바텔라 롱체말라다 이치기 따라 되니다 기베기다 로델라다 이치기 제바드네 도스마 계단미도 숨을 그래서
And so inferential cognition, and that kind of inferential cognition can be categorized into three. It's on page 270 and 71. Three types of inferential cognition. The first one is cognition based on empirical facts. Basically, these are something that to be apprehended directly through our sense organ, something that we see, so empirical facts. And the second is inferential cognition based on popular convention. Popular convention meaning that is popular in mundane kind of sense, in a worldly sense. And then third is inferential cognition based on trustworthy testimony. That's what translated here. Trustworthy testimony, which is relying upon valid scriptural quotations for such as, cause and effect, the subtlety of cause and effect, which we cannot be kind of ascertain through, but must rely upon scriptural quotations, valid scriptural quotations. So three types of inferential cognition.
다 텐데 제바다 고 제바케위 윤데 당기 공도 제바는 지금 깨지지기 윤들 뭐도 자고 말이 다고 깨진기 반이 제시 잔도 거스 제시자데 다 되게 깨진이 피기다 윤잘 때니 기베 로테 깨진이 바 연제네 에 기베 로텔라다 제시제 도스마 대제
Yes.
에네 에 무슨 좋아 제시다 제시라다 고 또바 제시당 또메 제시 대소가 가상만 가지고 차려와 된다고
Yes.
그래 되네 무슨 제도라다 된대기 제시 다 김전라 때는 개별로들라 양양 양양고마 곰네 로기 이게 다아 곰디제네 곰디제 제바제 제네 마 곰용도라 다 타마 가레잖아 당당 알아 쪽에 다 율칸당 강도스만 잘로이나 또바이나야 테 강가 가레잖아 그 던지단데 또비기 또벨로 차대올라 그 던지단 되네 용거레스 던지다 만데바 남지 살아 나와 있나 만데버다 율기다 남바 젠차 저기 젠차도 두 만나마이나 다 나죠 모숨된다 모숨제야디 다 모숨기 로제야디 다 키베세데레스 기다
Inferential cognition, as we said earlier, the duration that which kind of inferential cognition stays is momentary. As soon as inferential cognition kind of arises, and then the next moment becomes a subsequent cognition. That's why it's called subsequent cognition. And the subsequent cognition. Again, subsequent cognition can be categorized into two types. It's on page 272. We won't be going into those as we did in the first kind of course. The next comes the direct perception. Direct perception. Direct perception comes kind of at the ultimate or eventual stages of cognition. Because at the present moment, the way we kind of apprehend or comprehend things is what's called conceptual, or conceptuality, because it is mixed with the now there's a different translation word in the text that we studied earlier and the text that, this one. The text that we studied earlier, I think you use a generic image. This one use a universal image. So basically, when we are apprehending thing, it is mixed with universal image, the image in our head. So that is, and that's how we that's how we apprehend things or comprehend things. But as you get more familiar through analysis, understanding, ultimately you will be able to understand the thing directly without that image in your head, in your mind. And as if you are understanding the object nakedly in its raw form without going through kind of intermediary stage. And that stage of direct perception is called, within the direct perception, a yogic direct perceptions, understanding or seeing the object in its kind of raw or naked form without going through the images.
어떤데 기타 무슨 데라다 원보 무슨 미지 무슨 브라리 무슨 나저 무슨 진다 무슨 민다와 지 기타
Yes.
어 원보 쉐발 근데 키베게 다 미와 나와라 소벨 때니 키베게 다 무슨 데라 원보 무슨 진이 저거래 아니 이로 도발라 키베게 무슨 데라 있다 이문제 저거래 아니 쉐바 간다가네 라랑 자위 이 되게 rāri, tā yī jī ngōsum jāwē, rāri ngōsum zane, rāri jī jāguwa, tēne nā zhōng ngōsum zane tā, pāpi yu la tā, sātōmbo la tā, nē tē kāng kāngsā tēn, dō tēne sātāmbo yēnchē nē mā, sātāmbo yēnchē kī tā, kāngsā kī kī tā ngōsum tē la, nā zhōng ngōsum zā chādu kuwa rī, wā tā tū mā ngōsum mē tā yī chē, tā tēne, tā ngōsum yul ngosum to ba thela ta nala mange ba jine ta wambo ni gi yul chi la ngosum da ta long chu gi ba na ta chi de nala mange ba chi de kang la namba shu che te pa te nge gi or ma to ni ba de la ni ja la chanyam do namba shu chi mo to ma te wambo ni gi ja ni chi jar do che tu go ma re de ne gi ja chi ni chi jar do che mi to bi gyum jan la de ne ta jigla shukche dan jigla shukchunga chadu di shukchunga de nala manga ba tusma zade de chadu boris
Direct perception, the way it kind of produce, generate, there are four types. It's on page 273. The first one is sense perception. Direct perception that produced through sense perception, such as eye, ear, nose, so on and forth. And second is a mental perception based on a conceptual mental state arises, generates or produce whole types of direct perception. And then third is reflexive awareness, another different very term. The previous word that in the previous book, it is self-cognizer. Self-cognizer, if you remember self-cognizer or self-knower mind, the mind behind the mind. And here it is translated as a reflexive awareness. The Tibetan word is same, so difference of translation. The mind that kind of basically apprehends the mind itself. It's called reflexive or self-cognizer or self-knower. And then fourth is a yogic perception. Yogic perception basically refers to the perception of the Aryas, noble being, and it starts from first ground and above, all considered as a yogic perception. So when sensory consciousness is engaged in or interacts with the object, especially when you are using two kind of the sense consciousness or organ, as we said earlier, when you're using two simultaneously, one becomes stronger and one less powerful. And the one that is stronger, or the one that you use more attention, focus, that becomes the dominant, and the another becomes what's called indeterminate, right? Indeterminate perception. And the one that you gives more focus, more attention becomes the manifested, and the another, whatever sensory consciousness that you use becomes indeterminate. And because the reason here is that two sensory consciousness cannot manifest at the same moment simultaneously. So there'll be always kind of one will be stronger, one will be lesser, and the one that is more stronger, you will have that recollection, that memory, and the another one becomes, indeterminate perception.
어떻게 다 로지 둥기 모터에서 돌디 도시네. 다 제가 들린.
So that is briefly about, intro to 7 types of cognition. And if you have any questions, we'll do a discussion.
Our brain is working subconsciously on things. So maybe we studied problem, thought about it a lot. When we're consciously thinking about it, we're using, various symbols, objects in our head to reason about it. But then research has shown that, you think hard on a problem, then you start thinking about something else. Your subconscious is still working on the problem. And then that's where sometimes taking a shower, oh, aha, figured that out. What would that subconscious be categorized as the indeterminate, or like what about those subconscious thinking processes that are going on just outside of our awareness?
레버선들 레베기다 칼로 레버 삼당의 일 디고 일 레버 코난기 삼 땅심의 값이 세땅 땅심의 값 레베고는 비싸고 주스라도 다디 레베기 양 칼로 심 타워직 내가 세등이지 근데 좀다강 값도 내가 세등에 되서 응응규 그 셈디 레버디 내가 제거라다 칼로거래 제모도 내게 양 슈고라 무튜니 칼로거래 레버 참여되게 내가 쳐야 되는 슈고 토픽이 전부 써야 되는 도서 근데 레버 참여 나오다 시기 딱다 되게는 하시 디 나라망에도 이제 진짜 되기로 해로도 딱고는 배샤나 내가 지 다디 레버 응에서 되고 레버 배주당하 줘야 돼 배주마다 하는 슈고 소고도 되는 뭐 토비아도 해야 다든지 띵에 내가도 셔고도 삼도 다단기 응에서 되보기 고 내가 제대로 레벨 3로 되게 워라 셰바 타모지 무튼이 내가 제대되고 그랬어. 근데 셰바 타모디 라오레디 나알망에 어려워도. that subconsciously the 가리 계실게 하고 왜 되고리 벽에 비거나 시코랑 연하면아 어디 도와드셔. 라오 말다간 셰백이 레백이 와를 단대 가로 레백이 내가 타모지 시대에 지금 무튼 제대고 그랬어. 딱 강은 응규도 정해면 내게
다 맞고 나라 망해 봐서 자동을라
그럼 계속 듣는 뒤에 네 가르라네. Maybe you can clarify what do you mean by subconscious? Is subconscious a mind, or is it a state of consciousness, or it is a separate, or what is subconscious? So it's asking
psychology. We call our brain processes things, but we are not aware of it doing that until maybe later, or when we start investigating more of the like subtle consciousness sort of things, that we don't have direct access to that part of our brain.
So
but it's still working to understand things when we are not even focused on that problem.
His question is it the one? Is that the same as the consciousness, or is that a separate consciousness?
Yeah, and what would it be classified as? I don't know.
그런데 권한라 세력이라시나 레바여라 레베기 차지식 나로라 아니 셰바 참여 나가시네 네 원대로 안 주고 남겨 섬당디 좀 몰라 디나로 다 주요 모터다 되게 제대로 셔도고 말했어 니엘다 저거 당보고는 되지 된대지 나중에 컨디션이 되지 그렇고 안 주대 시간에 저거 되고 란 적이 나니 렌자여라
다 나중에 나로라 단다 자와디 제바 탐제고 레베기 돈인데 세계고 선티 제고 말했어 레바 지구에 돈인데 세계고디 그러와 레베기 콜라 예 셰바델라 자와지의 로봇 무슨 로봇 지구원 생라 이나 샘 자동 레벨 로스이 Mayoris, te mares, lebali losu, sem zedio, lebali losu yoni. Lebigi ko sem laro, chawa cheyagi, chiro samji chigori. Chigori. Tanda nala mangi benga tu ching yul ching de la chig de nal chi mangi ba chadu gori, salvo mea chadu gori zeyati, shiba chig la jargo maris, ko leba yimbai na thara ki kacha chigo maris. Lebe nalo ne leba thara ki kacha de chigo maris. Koni thara niga thaboina, niga 찬년바 임바 가지라 윤니라 미다와 자지도라 자제당가니다 코타라 쇼도 거레스 가르잖아 군주 윤은 주빈네 감나 다 지데 타 살은 도야다 지데 다 미살라 차도야디 차네다 나라망에 자고레스 셰바 코랑이 뭐고 차네잖아 군이 타라 찍바요레 찍바지 용고 요레스
율을 주고 가 셰바니를 셰고로
셰바니 율니를 주베 셰바니 율지를 주베 가자데 말이스 율 소소소 셰바 소저기 다 왕부 율 소소소라 주 용데라 코니 뒤냠도 주바이나다 왕부 찍데라 살은 차용데라 젬바데 미살라 차데모도 고 타라기 왕부 니보데 타라기 가자 시고 말이스 찍바레스 언니 타나 타냠다 라나 라냠데 자고
So I was asking, first, whether such subconscious in Buddhist context, is it something that is identifiable to be kind of accept such subconscious? So Kishore was saying, when we talk about consciousness or mind or cognition, what the brain does is brain kind of sort of supports the functioning of the consciousness or cognition, and but not everything that is consciousness is done by brain. So the consciousness is sort of more broader, extensive than the brain itself, and here when we are talking about the indeterminate perception, this indeterminate perception here is not talking about kind of subtle or coarser level of one particular consciousness, say brain. Here we are talking about two separate, sensory consciousness engaging in two different separate objects. When we do that, then, when two kind of sensory consciousness engaging in the two different objects, in terms of the subtlety and the coarseness, there's no differences between those two sensory consciousness. But when two are engaging, one becomes more kind of intense, more kind of clearer, because of the attention and the focus or concentration that you give. The others kind of automatically becomes subordinate and indeterminate. And that's what we are talking here. In terms of, the indeterminate perception, we are talking about the two simultaneous consciousness. Both are same in terms of subtle or coarse. There's no differences. But, the perception that we get from using these two differs because of how intense or how concentrated you are. So we are, so kind of talking two different things here.
semna lebani chigi tola kacha shebaina te kala kabu shibo chagi medos kare shebaina nge kotola pena kebajo kembutlum lodesni kebajo kongi sonji yosare te sonde na lola la kare son yorese dela ngama ari gi na lola puji leba chuni mejo puji heresi ti orsido tate karesana pude leba kyuni pula leba chiga yomares hieni pude longa partu deshase ro ta member de joge member ta seri begi telan deshe kari yago japsha zetola pude ona leba kyuni mena pude condition de go rese tola ane pude ge tandanga joge kaji ge tela karindel se ge go rena 마저게 주복이 되 유바지여라. 기기 유바지. 되게 레벨이 자와지 두고 그래서. 되게 잔이 되고 그래서 대세지 얘기도 되고 그래서. 세리 카지 그래서나 레바큐니 매바이나 그 레벨이 상상라 다 갈로다 가지고 슐다 마서네 타모 요로
Mm.
레베기 슐다 마서네 콜라데 지요레스 또 대주가 다 레가데 지고레스 되리긴데지 야기도
So here, if we consider brain and the mind or consciousness, if you consider this as a one entity, then it would be very difficult, difficult to accept such kind of one entity. And because you were saying that he saw this mentioned by one of the scholar from Tibet, Khenpo Tsudimlodu, and he said that many, many years before in America, there was a child born with no brain, yet he, survived up to 5 years old. And now scientists were asking question, how can he manage to, survive without brain? And there are different explanations. Some are saying that because of the spinal cord and that kind of to some extent kind of substitute the functioning of the brain, and some says that because of some leftover organ nearby the brain kind of again kind of does the functioning of the brain. So any comment?
당가 저거 당비 중에 가래서는 그 레베기 자와 차상가네 내가 차상가 봐이나야 샘기 단다 자와 제대 봐이 그 레바데 샘이 카가 임바데 에 셰고레 tegarizane mi shi de nyala tanda nga nga tsuki ta nangpeki loso la nga tsu todam deya ri jiyorwa. O tezo kanga karizane lebeki jawa chasang nga ni tanda semgi jawa manya ba yoyo deba di senri bi tensang taje chebe ine kul cheba ina chi tumri mindawa chi yoba di tanda taje chede che jimba di ta taji do tanda tumri chasang ji ta tanda tunyo ma resi.
From Buddhist point of view, even if a brain stopped completely its functioning, consciousness still exists. It still functions. And the obvious example we use is post-death meditative state. And those practitioners, their brain is basically dead. Brain is not working at all, but they are still not dead. And so science are still kind of in the process of investigation, and there's no sort of concrete result of how and why it's happening.
So it's
Okay.
it's brain function versus mind.
Shebada, shebegi legada, lebegi legani kacha oralodo.
kunyi kagazina ta mi sunpe negamna kunyi chikchikla ro chiga horisi. Lebeki chawa, lebeki semna lepanyiki kunyi chikpen chikto chini dusma dugu hori. Ta mi shiduwe negamna ko lebeki chawa chaya desu rabeki ne chawa chima to tamuki lega ko che dugu amaris. Mi shiduwe lebeki chawa chasang gani ta shebaraba nga dudu na nga zogi jidangi ta 미지임 나 자리베게다 미데 시타오레 베레 시고르디 당가 저게 남베나라 단다 샘기 샘 탐욕이 다 자와 예번서 단다 시요 말이지 시고르디
At the time of living, we say, the mind and consciousness are dependent on each another and kind of working, together. But once that person is, diseased, brain is not more working, and because what brain does is it does the functioning of a grosser level of consciousnesses. So, but to scientists, that means clinically dead person, but to Buddhists, still not, because this the subtle consciousness is still functioning and still exists. Yeah.
So we grew up in the West and we're educated in the West to think about the brain being the mind and not really understanding the mind at all. So, and that's real scary oftentimes because what we're doing, we tend to deny all our previous educational learning, and in my case, a lot of years, much more so than most of the people in this room. So the question is, there's a thing of acceptance or fear or not being enough, which is so typically Western, that to me, at least in my study of Buddhism, I had to really work through that and just be like I was dreaming and just accept, be like a child, even like the Christian Bible says, become like a child, to be open to something that is so, in a way, foreign to our way of education. So when the Buddhists, when I was trained about mind, and the mind is the heart, and that connection, that really helped me, because we think of our emotions in the mind. And so the fear, the things that stops somebody, where would you place that, Geshe-la? That whole, it's not a rejection. It's still, I think it's still at level 1 in doubt. It's hard to go beyond doubt. We can hear, the second level, but then we have such a strong affinity to go with what we're trained to do over time, and the world that we're existing in, how everybody else thinks. This is just so, Buddhist philosophy is so unusual for the Western person, and it's hard to get past what the Western acceptance is. I think we're doing better right now, because there's definitely 2 different ways of being in the Western way of seeing the world. But I think that's really necessary to even be open to, teachings that, were around long before Christianity ever came around, or the trainings that we have. So that fear, that it's a fear, it's an apprehension, it's almost like a glue back to where we were trained. Does that help?
An attachment to it.
Yeah, it is, definitely. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
정말 저 도도 대신다. 눕졸다 레바디 세미레라다 다디 그 종다도 롭종다 리숑 상와디 나올 상원신데로 디상 상원신데 아니 따다는 낭베게 돈에 제시견데 저걸 때베디 셔나슈게 되는데샤스 칼로다 kum 제잔다 투어데 되다 데인데 저걸다 낭베게 나네 제시신바스게 되라 아니 단다보도 그런서 kum지 탭데 교조로 kum지 탭데 교다 장교디 아니 모란도 베시는 셈다 셰바다 닝기 제셰들 남베 걸셔도 펜슈 토선스 단 눕조베 나로 벳코르든 데게 살론다 벳 콤지슈신 보이도 엔디 칼로레 티파샤니 디게니 칼로르타지기 야마나 딜라 차발라오레 디게 신나데 디 메와 소답라오레 디게니로단 칸데 조야 탑시 가르르 쇼르르 가르르 디쇼로타 디 칼로레 단다보다 쿠란졸로 롭준테 샤교디기 마땅한 나오래 다지기 마디오 나오래 남배숑레디 베트 남배숑디 단눕죠발라 사와로지다 칼로 신 디토르케 계실라 섬주요로다 미세조 다시 나게 신난다 코란조 리숑 그 토르 로존 데시 주셔로 kum지디 다 교와다야
다 다텔라 가르주거다. 당아도 남배 중니 셰샤바 대당 네 중전단에 셰샤바 띵이 바로라 미래에 개발 가는도다. 토당부 소속에 있다 로브존진이 마 퇴버져야 되래. 근데 퇴버지네 다 될라 삼네 고 제버져야 돼. 그 삼중지거래. 고 제버지네 강라 덴베기 yapsa 체도 강라 덴베기 yapsa 충원도 대기 제버지네 된다며야 돼. 차고래서. 그래. 내 삼제 제베나. 다 두신에 다 윤제 예바나 티 윤제인데 네 칼로르데 윤제 통기 예바나 때 당도랑 강라 윤제 통구 매바이나 고때 림비림비만 그 로율레만 다 제버지야 매버지야 제야디 탑시데레스 마도 다 가르소다 람상 호드갈라 지 줄루 젠지갈라 람상 도스마 규르세나데 하장기 갈라 가버리세 딩규레 단다 디 가족이 규레 가져다 시고 말에 세위기 남비 중니 세단기 다 이 로종 기림바 지어로 데이터 내게 대체게 거마도 아 가서 당가 저게 에 진앙 더비잖아 이 진앙 매버 람상 매버 저 탑시 가리어를 잡아이나 타고 어 되게 냠부 가는도 진앙 더비지만은 나 동알 더비잖아 동알 되게 냠부 가래잖아 아 대화 때에 때 두비야 때에 다 무티니 친줄 치수 동할 때 무티니 키고 여번에 때 미케게 탑시 가래서 그 유견 거야 돼 동알기 유견 거야 돼 셰고래 때 동안 거야 때 유견 때다 거 봐이나 동알 미케한테 그 라이징 차도 거 어두시는 탑람 때 돼서 지나매 봐서
Uh, from from Buddhist point of view, or for what Buddhist scriptures or texts would say is study, and when you study, do kind of comparative study, especially if you come to kind of two contradicting subject or understanding, and you start with studying, obviously, with learning, listening, and then whatever that you have learned and listened, you must take that to analysis or contemplation and see whether your understanding is supported by evidence or not. And that's what we call, as we said earlier, wisdom derived from contemplation. You get wisdom from contemplation, whole another level of wisdom as compared to just listening or gathering information. And so whatever that you have achieved or learned based on reasoning or logic, then you should further pursue that. On the other hand, if it is not backed up by reason, logic, uh, the method is gradually sort of make those understanding knowledge disappear, from your mind. And obviously, we are not talking about kind of conversion, but in the case of converting from one religion to another, it's extremely difficult, and it's something that doesn't happen, quickly. It takes time. It's a very gradual process. So, and what Geshe-la is saying here is that, according to Buddhist understanding, how you sort of train or prepare your mind in dealing with this contradicting or conflicting understanding or knowledge. And when talking about, as you said, fear, how can you make fear disappear? There's no one, kind of quick method to make that happen. But the process here is that whenever fear, for example, usually we talk about suffering and happiness. When you don't want the suffering, the natural process in Buddhism is, what is the antidote? What makes the sufferings go away? And you do that, and you start from there. And again, with application, if it is coming again, then you need to make sure that there's no causes and conditions and factors that make you kept in fearing. And because as long as there is a causes, factors, and conditions that makes you fear, brings you a sense of fear, your fear will remain same. So what you need to do is sort of go back and find out where that fear is arising, and try to deal with the causes or conditions and factors that makes the fear manifested. So that's what would do through Buddhist approach or practice. Yeah.
I have a kind of a technical question.
Sure.
This is Diane, and I'm remote. Um, the text states that of the 7 types of cognition, 5 are valid or not valid, and 2, direct perception and inference, are valid cognitions. Since subsequent cognition happens momentarily after a valid cognition, I'm wondering why it's not considered as a valid cognition. Dharmakirti's statement from the exposition of valid cognition says since it apprehends the apprehended, that conventional cognition is not accepted to be valid cognition. And I don't understand why.
Mhm.
Can Geshe explain?
Okay, sure. tanda lori duen nalone da tsema da tsemi korisha. Lori duen nguzum da jeba de tsema nguzi chigdos. En cheshe de tsema nguzi chigmindos. Di tanda duen di tanda di morang di lung di koso masonsa. Tanda cheshe naldo. Cheshe nal tanda namje ki lung chidwa. Cheshe ka cheshe ki ngore. Cheshe sheben di shol namje ki lung chido. namje lung di rase. 제시기 나오 남자가 롱시대
들게.
어 세마 남대
알레리도.
언제
소지 근접 니세야 돼.
언제 된다 가려고 그래서 제시도 생각하실 말을 뒤들 롱디 고쳐 맞서서
어디 조안 진실 근접 니세도라 거기 가르지 거잖아. 나를 셰바 고랑다 리팅기 좋아. 셰바 아마 되게 마조의 율지 그 사든지야요 말이지.
네.
그 처마 많이 미금자 가르잖아. 거기까지 다음 고랑까지 니바 차대로 제시 고랑 셰베기 윤다 마잖아. 그 윤까지 니비가 레데교 셰바지 차대로. 그지 니바 차대로 거기까지 담보기 마조의 율 사바지 콜라 중요해요 말이지. 그지 담보기 좋은 짐바티 다가랑 콜 라량 고랑이 징기에 차니 그 제시 잡아버려도 조안지지 군접 니세 조안제도라 그까지 담보기 좋은 짐비 율의 양결 그 중에 차니 그게 제시 잡아버려서
The quote from Exposition of Valid Cognition, page 272. Since it apprehends the apprehended, that conventional is not accepted. The object that subsequent cognition apprehends, it's basically object which is the continuation of the whatever was apprehended earlier. So there's nothing new that subsequent cognition is apprehending. There's nothing new. There's nothing fresh. So therefore, it is apprehending sort of continuation of what is already apprehended by the first moment of cognition. Does that make sense, or you can ask?
It makes sense, but in my mind, it still doesn't answer the question of why it's not considered valid cognition, since what it's apprehending is a valid cognition.
세마 가진 임바던데 하고 마선사 세마라 쇼라 세마 가진 제시대 세마 가진 지금에 뭐라 세고 샤마선사
제가 체마 제대로 가르잖아. 나를 코랑기 윤들베 지게 마도바 마시바지 코랑기 소마 토마 사르도 시바텔라 코 체마즈니 민타바레스 다 단데 제시라데 제시기 자와라 가르잖아. 거의 또야기 율대당 그지 담보기 또야기 율딩이라 개발게 그지요 말이야. 또당게된 가 시바까지 담보다 제시자데 시바까지 니바데 차대래 시베기 윤지 마 바지 지용들라 고 까지 담보다 니바 숨바지 마 바지 용들라 까지 담보다 니바니 바로라 그율 또다라 개발게 그지 매비 차네 그 참마 많이 바자고 그래서 그래
Yes.
딱
Yes. Here we need to obviously understand what we mean by valid. Valid cognition. Valid refers to apprehending for the first time, apprehending newly, or apprehending freshly, something that hasn't apprehended before. And in that case, when we talk about the subsequent cognition is considered as the next moment of the cognition. When we say next moment, it is not freshly or newly apprehended. It is already apprehended, but the apprehension of the second moment. Second moment of the apprehension, which means it is not new, not fresh. And it is basically apprehending the same kind of object which is apprehended by the first moment of that consciousness. That's why it's not valid.
Got it. Thank you.
그 세모호랑지다야 세모호랑 개와 여러
It's gonna be like a balance point.
대주백이다랑
A
라.
balance point, so you've got them both kind of there, and one, they haven't decided which one's going to be the one that continues.
谢谢.
그 건일로 제발 차라리 제발 지중나 되게 제발 지가 요 말았어. 그율 또야 될라 또당기 제발
또 림발라고.
림바기 다 내제기 림바지요라. 윤rinlo 차기 제발마도 제발까지 당보다 제발까지 니번이라 차라리 제발 개구지요 말이. 율라 지중이 제발 개구지요 말았어.
Yes. There's no differences in terms of the mode of apprehension, in terms of the intensity. It's just a kind of sequential thing. The subsequent cognition comes after whatever the first cognition is. So otherwise, there's no differences. So that's why it's called subsequent, and it comes next moment after, the fresh, new, or valid cognition. Doug?
I have a question about logic, how it's understood in the Buddhist study. So in the text that we're reading, it says out of the seven that we talked about, two of these cognitions can be valid in their direct perception and inference.
Valid?
Valid.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
correct. Correct.
Okay.
And I know from previous conversations I had with Yeshua Sonam, and something that you mentioned today, the Buddhist path really trains us into direct perception. That's really what is needed. And my understanding is logic is a very powerful tool, but that's never going to get you to, that you're never going to complete the Buddhist path purely on logic. And I'm comfortable with that. And one of the reasons is in the Western philosophy or epistemology, understanding logic, given what logic is, you take one or more bits of information, and from that you infer a new bit of information. In Western epistemology, it's understood that you're always depending on an assumption. And there is no logic without assumptions, and assumptions can be infinitely regressed. Now, something else you said today was when we're talking about inference, that it may begin by hearing. Someone gives you some information that you hear, so that that's an example of how you might process logic. So, after all that, my question is there something similar in the Buddhist understanding of logic where it is not dependable? Logic is not dependable because it depends on assumptions. It depends on hearing something, or it's similar understanding.
그런 저거 대신다 간다 완전히 표시되는 dingen 세마릭보다 덴스릭보다 쇼라 덴스릭보다 딜라데 노조백이 따단지나 덴스릭보다 아니 카드에게 코 칼라고래 다들 제시라는 지구나 칼라고래 제시 맞다 제가 말에 이주 당아주 이주로지를 카드에 지기 시상 시시로샤 아니 시샤나만도 지기 그 덴지를 칼라고리아 드라마토로 쇼레스 다간다 코란 치와데 데르샤 남베 나로 덴지를 보디 칼라고리 덴지를 볼라 칼라고리 캡처 먹어야지 레 먹어야지 따단데 쇼레스 가르라나 덴데기 덴지를 보디 타마데 코마 시샤데 잠발라 고 이주갈 마 밥땡에로 이주는 고중에 단 눕쇼 따단데로 쇼레스 덴데 간다 덴지를 보디 낭베기 따단 토라 taku nyebardo shi chosala or kyap chosala oje mare lagdo to what the answer.
Tenzi ribate icho do pena icho do buji kibala toma kia gi marza da masuna tenzi ribate chade ores. Tenzi ribate la teni ta haro bala da icho gi loji kibala ko di te ridwa se gimzen ji ko ro. Gimzen de la teni ta te ina mena nyame ko cheba che gi ji tenzi riba chade ore. Ta lo ijo nimba ina ijo koran kiesa gi marza tenzi riba chade ore. Tenzi riba ten la teni ki ores. Ta tenzi la teni ta lo kari de jimba ina tenzi la teni ki de be lo de ta lo kalo ta lo tondin lo tempo yama ji gyur choja me tempo ji char go res. Ta tenzi la maten na jine tus ma top ki de gen lo din ba na ko jema yumza yang da ji to na lo din ji do res yang gyur lo tempo yo ma res lo je.
Yes. So here, when you use the word assumption, I was using sort of technical word here, correct assumption, one of the cognition. The assumption itself in Buddhist understanding is based on logic, because assumption, so the very foundation, the very seed of the assumption is logic in Buddhist understanding. In order to assume something, prior to that, in order to say, for example, this is that because of this, there has to be some kind of logic that needs to apply. So the assumption itself, the logic is the foundation or the basis or the seed of the assumption. And whatever that kind of, the cognition that arises or produced or generated from logic, or more kind of technical epistemology, is considered as valid, reliable, and because such conclusion from a logic or epistemology, it cannot be kind of change easily, as you compare to some kind of cognition that you have attained suddenly, and with that or assumption or understanding, when that assumption or understanding is later encountered by logic, it cannot sustain. So no.
Chasa saye chomden de rangi ge song yung do la ta di sangi ge song re zene chi za chimbo tan yumzen do chine ta deba che ayo mare iche che ayo mare tel juge mare jugo mare es ke che sho de tambu song yung do la kar sa tan de oh ke long ta ke nan ni se ja de se jin do la ba ta la ngai ka zene soya yumzen kora kar zene 되게 댄스 리바디 쓴 거です. 담보 견한지 댄스 리바를 제바지 윤전도 하면도 다. 이 사기기 송인반에 사기 송인백이 윤전 가래도. 디 지지레 담이다 버레서 전지 담이다 인방이 자 이제 제가 말은 담이다 인비 윤전 가래자. 그 개발인도 제발인도 어떤 딘데기 윤전 라테니 개발이나 딘데기 개발로 됐다 로템포 지은 거래서. 자산 댄스 리바 pen samari begi color da cheba chega da yone mena la cha da mo na zo de cha de res.
Buddha himself, as you know, when he gave his teaching, the very beginning, he said, do not consider my, teaching holy or sacred, or do not shouldn't be based on devotion, and follow, this famous quote, monks and scholars, just like you investigate the quality of gold. And so what Buddha is saying in that verse is use your logic to follow his teachings, and simply, like we said earlier, sound is impermanent because of functioning thing. Do not believe in, straightforward. Rather, you need to understand, functioning, production, the reason. And so in general, the epistemology or valid cognition, becomes, in Buddhism, instrument, like an instrument, lakja khare lakja sha lamb.
Samari be.
Khare lakja. Khare.
Tenzi report, tenzi.
Khare gi lakja le.
That Samari be, that Sama Lucia Jura. Yuljan Sheba Jura. Yuljan Sheba the Hiala, that tenzi te ko Yuljan zo the chat.
So logic or epistemology is the main instrument to attain, awareness or cognition or understanding in Buddhism.
You'll tell the Shell. Tenzi did.
저 고랑이 당기 저 당고들 낭배추나 인지미지 낭추데 답들 낭추리 해말 땡고를 땡고 말을로도
어때잖아.
땡고를로
나도 땡고 있고 저도 자도 땡고로.
So the point here is coming down to logic or more kind of technical epistemology is something that is used as an instrument in Buddhism. So the answer is it's dependable, it depends.
Yeah, if I can.
Sure.
Dig into that a little bit. So, by having logic depending on underlying logic, which itself depends on underlying logic, at some point, according to the Western understanding, you will get to something that cannot be proved. Simply has to be believed.
Okay.
Faith.
Okay.
As it were. And is it the case in the Buddhist understanding that if you get to an assumption that is provided to you from a validly cognizing mind, such as the mind of a Buddha, that can be taken on faith as a correct assumption. So if it's something, information provided by a Buddha or a scriptural reference, then that can be a valid assumption.
this would say much you could do. Quran led this to that Nubjo Dadan Shora, Nubjo, the Handa logic, the Semari with some Daganda Kumzengi, Semari, but the Semegi Namsha de Da, Kumze Shea, the Kumzejigla, Kumze de Kumze Shimbajil, those my Kumze Korangi, Tatama de Kumzen, the Korangi, Shishazaro, the Mewasha to Goresa. That the Mal ladies of an color, Chigi. 대바 야무나 이제 딜레직 톨도 고레스 고 줌제 고랑 시셔서 줌제 고는 꼭 시고르니에 메어로 샤르 고레서 다 낭베 낭롤 베샤시나 다 고랑게 세마르든 상계가 세마제로 쇼로 디즈리든 스카 세마들 지디 좀 발다 데 가로 대바데 이제로 샤르 고로 줌제 마이 바 딘디 따단 딘디 토네게 칼고레 따단 뚝스탄다 딩마르라고 있어
다 자기가 남베게 사상이 송샤베게 송샤바테 고 대전 손도만 이거래서 남베게 세마리바 저거라다 근데 남베게 color Buddhist science, Buddhist tradition.
낭베기 따릅체 낭베기 체리체 낭베기 추어라고 된 소라고
그것도 이와 소소 제고 겸생 가래서 봐이나 같이 그 대발을 때는 저거지 연구를 대발을 때는 저거지 연구를 이는 베이직 지자 거랑 맞다데 가래서는 그 참아 리백이 겸잘 때는 당부 제바지야 돼 자고 그래서
we categorize Buddhist teaching in modern sense kind of three, Buddhist religion, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist science. And in this, regarding these three, one way of approach is, from devotion or with faith. But generally, the understanding here is that, or consideration here is that one must start from, a logic or reasoning. 김생.
정보 그 김전 라다니 제바지니 주소나 다 남베나 주소나 다 대바지니 도고사기 지지 용거です.
So then in Buddhism, there is a way where, sort of approach, you start from reasoning and logic, and then you can move into devotional faith kind of, and there's a that way as well. So.
배는 가지고 다 람홈네 다 지금 도바 공도 펠라지요라. 티 펠라기 림바티서 간가 다 소속이 냠뇨 냠뇨 가르 다 소속이 라렌다네 다 곰디 때네 소소소 다 콤바텔라 때네 바 드라지르모도 대졸라 다 윤전 된다 싫어요모라. 아 상예 송자바티 디두스 기가르자데 소속이 냠뇨 때네 다 콤바 도바가레 도구에 메텔라 빠니 드라르모도.
For example, in Buddhism, the spiritual realizations that you attain by following a path, in that process, it sort of entirely depends upon your own realizations. You cannot sort of, use a logic in that, and it depends on your level of realizations, and then based on that, you can further kind of develop, and there's no really kind of, kind of reasoning or logic or epistemology kind of needed in there. And so it's that's a kind of, way that you can sort of move forward in spiritual without logic. No.
If you don't mind, I have a kind of follow-up on that. So at the basis, all of the reasoning and logic is based off of a conceptual understanding, right? So wouldn't any wisdom or any outcome from that be like a stained wisdom or an impure wisdom in the ultimate sense? Because once you get to a certain point, and say you have the direct yogic perceivers and now are having non-conceptual experiences, doesn't seem like there would be logic in that experience. Where am I going with this? So is it safe to say that all of that, anything that we reason about is actually kind of impure or not actually clear wisdom? Like you don't actually get that until you, hit the first movie or something?
지난해 나 저기 세마드릭 받았다 김제 가서 삼단에 단다 마마마 밥술은 시디 안에 가서 똑벨로라고 그래 똑로로 줄 시샤오로라도 뒤에 좀더 똑벨로도 고난데 양다보다 세마 메디 좀 안에 가라고 그래 다 장마 디기 깨줘라고 그랬대 내 중교도 자상 안에 장마 많이 받아 세마 많이 받지 처음 말을로도
간데스
디가서 코랑 글라신다 So when I take your conceptual understanding, I'm using that conceptual as the word that is used in here, which has an exact Tibetan word. So, but I'm not sure whether that's the correct what you're saying on this. Okay, 그런 시에다. 다간데 세마릭보다 김제 가르핀 가지고 시에네마 표시단에 마데너와 디마 파파 파스는 망시로다 시샤서로다 가지고 로떡바지 시샤고로서 로떡바드 내야 계교로로 정말 디인데 좀 로떡바들 기대 좀 따고 고조서도 그런 게 맞아다 수연데 로떡바는 디네야 계교 차상에네 다 깔로로 양다와 많이 발로 세마 많이 발로 교인디 교인도 덴바지 좀 말외로도
말이다 다도 담보 대구지 메시게 타마베 다 로랑가 와도 저리 비차되어라 로치담바지로 다들라 김전레 때네 기빌 김전 양다지레 때네 도바이나 콜로 양다바지 차고레 김전 타나지레 때바이나 김전 양다마인기 지레 때바이나 페나 제다베긴 다타바지미 짐바타부테데스 제다베 치로 제다베다 다타바지미 제발타부데 고 김전 요 김전 타나지마도 김전 양다바 메바선자 고 로딩 간두고 메바 지두어 김전 양다 지 통소나 다 나베기 존네 다 미다바레 김전 가레잖아 고 유겐리 케베 김전 되네 제바당 다가니지 그지기질은 지유비 김잖아 되는다 미다바 증게 봐서다 된리게 미다바 또 별로디 로 양다 받고 템버치네 에 아까 남 사마 얘기 봐도 반 못되는 그 윤도 만도 좀 더디고 그랬어.
So here, I guess Gijo was saying the starting point, we can say the starting point is kind of what we call ordinary, ordinary perception or ordinary understanding or general kind of, perception. And then from there, it depends on when you sort of move forward into understanding, when you, two ways, when you rely upon a valid reasoning or valid logic, you move into the valid understanding of the things. On the other hand, if you move based on the understanding of fallacious, fallacy kind of reasoning logic, then you move into that understanding of, for example, we used the earlier, non-Buddhist particular school, they consider sound as a permanent, entity, and they use that logic to prove sound is a permanent, which from the Buddhist point of view, using Buddhist logic, because sound by nature is functioning, produce, depends by nature momentary, therefore kind of, sort of, spread into two valid, non-valid, depending on what kind of, I guess, cognition or reasoning that you use. And in Buddhist way, when you have a proper or valid understanding, you then make familiarize with that understanding, further develop, and then eventually, move towards the attaining of enlightenment.
서로 차이나.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but still, is that, even though we're working toward that valid understanding, is it still rooted in flawed wisdom?
근데 뭐 시샤서다
Because
말,
it's not ultimate wisdom.
근데 시샤서더라도 시샤다 말자로 어디
마르다고 땐지데 차대기도 왔지.
코랑 당길하신 제가 로독바샤고를 논두 생긴 로진의 고조로 알아도 로독보다 양타고 많이 되는데 좀 벌고 걸어왔다 시샤서다 디코나 노르와신도 엔데 내 가네게 가주게네 가주페네가 고 노르와다 견쟁이랑 신진지 말벨라 그서 땡이고 다디네 관시다 코란 노조고 따당이 땡기
다 지자사 그런 너로다 현재기라 지진 차고 말에 낭비 중리 잡아는 그래서는 무슨 생일에 살아서 그 가자데 시고로 생일에 자기 샘 그런 그 팀이 말에 받은 와서와래데 텔라 다 자다 모순로서 팀이 그도 좀 디비디비 김생기 다 sem디바데 제바도 보지 통고를 난고를 뭐도 그 디바 살아이나 렌신 코랑 몰은 줄도 매바
So from Buddhist point of view, you're saying that the very basis of foundation is not considered as something impure or flawed, That's why we talked earlier, the nature of the mind itself is clarity and awareness, and all, all fallacies are, advantageous. So the innate nature of the mind itself, which is the very basis of foundation itself, is considered as a nature of clarity, awareness, and pure. I think no. Yes.
가리라베 고레 신감 소펜단데 와마레 종웨네 제레 세와 덴진 겨조인 샤베지데 바도 땡교로제 정바바베 지라 켐본다 콘도 담보 대양 디진네 대다군게 제소다로진 개원데다 탐제라도 드스무자베 개와담제게 응어와 콘라초도 마바데 다신게베 사완데게 삼보제제라도 응어와라기 장조든조 렘보제 마제 바나마제 요제 개와 냠바메 바라양 공네 공도 베와라쇼 통예 타와 렘보제 마제 바나 in
the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, generously, Tenzin Gyatso, remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva monks usually attain omniscience and Samandravata too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good action. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. May the supreme jewel be of emptiness that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more.
Thank you.
Thank you. I left some, copy of this morning Intro to Buddhist class of over there if you want to take, or maybe take a picture or post on Facebook. That would be helpful because we had this class morning, but other than Jason, there's no people. So, as you know, the intro to classes, I consider this a very important, especially because this should be class for people who know nothing about Buddhism. So there should be some publicity, and you can post on your social media, Facebook. And I have outlined, the class and break down the topic until August 16. And so if you do that, that would be helpful, especially for, people who are interested in Buddhism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenna. Thank you, Geshe-la.
And I have a breakdown of this class as well. So it should be posted on Facebook, as well as probably you might get through email. Thank you.
Look forward. Thank you.
Seriously, think about it. Listen, listen, all the audio, where they. So. So I'm reading a little book I just picked up. That's Phyllis Merton on Zen and Christianity.
The Dalai Lama had, did you read the one where His Holiness was giving a talk to Thomas Merton Society?
No, but I'm